Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to another Next Generation Internet Forward Salon, organized by the IoT Council and co-hosted by Ellen Tech. This is Magdalena Kaili speaking on behalf of the European Law Observatory on New Technologies. Really thrilled for today's discussion, having with us, as always, Gael Degas, the policy advisor, Loretta Anania from DG Connect, and our co-organizer, Rob van Kranenburg, and our exquisite guest, Miss Primavera de Filippi. Our topic today is really hot about digital self-sovereign identity. And with no further ado, I will give the floor to Ms. Loretta Anania to introduce our special guest for today. Thank you and see you soon during the discussion that will follow.
Thank you, Magdalena. It's a real pleasure to introduce Primavera de Filippi, although she doesn't really need an introduction because she is internationally well known. And she has two faces. She's both a lawyer and a tech whiz, which is really quite amazing. So she's known for her crypto, for her work on democracy and governance, and she now has a number of papers on how to, well, she will tell you. What I can say is that I'm very happy to have these salons, which are a way of encouraging people to take decisions on the internet that they use on a daily basis, because our unit funds, among other things, blockchains, but also self-sovereign identity as many ways of getting trust back into the hands of the internet users. So SSI is one of these new promises of giving more control and more trust. And Primavera has been in our projects from the beginning, leading on the peer-to-peer value. She's a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard, and she is also the director of the CNRS in Paris. So it's a real pleasure to have you with us. Thank you. Primavera, up to you to tell us.
Thank you. Yeah, so maybe you can put this, yeah, this slides. So this is, today I'm going to talk about the findings or the insights that we developed with a paper that I wrote in 2019 on self-sovereign identity, and it was specifically looking at the use of blockchain-based identity management system in the humanitarian settings. But I will then expand the presentation also to tackle some more generic thoughts about the challenges that need to be addressed with self-sovereign identity, and also like the new and recent development that are emerging. And this is all part of a more like comprehensive research that I'm doing for many years now on blockchain technology, regulation, and governance. And also now it's part of, since January, I started this ERC project, which is specifically focusing on the question of blockchain as a potential driver for confidence and trust when adopted within the context of existing public, private, or international institutions. And so, of course, the question of identity is absolutely key in this field. So just to begin very shortly, an introduction to the terms of identity management system, because there is actually oftentimes quite some confusion, and terms are too often used interchangeably, which means that many people are talking about different things using the same terminology, or talking about different things with the same word. So first of all, the very important distinction between identity and identifier. And so the identity is really like what is characterizing the individual, so the complex of all the attributes and all the all the aspects of a person that actually enable us to recognize this individual as a consistent person over time, in spite of things changing. And then there's the identifier, and actually the identifier should not change. And so the identifier is a reference, is actually not intended as such to describe, to provide qualitative assessment of the person, but rather it's referencing an identity in the real world. And identifiers can be both based on elements that are endogenous to this identity. So for instance, like the biometrics, fingerprints, iris scan, etc. Or they can be exogenous, and oftentimes they are exogenous, which is if there is a third-party authority that is assigning a particular identifier, such as the name, such as the social security number, the passport number, etc., and which is arbitrarily assigned to a particular identity and will act as its identifier. And so in order for an identifier to be of any use as an identifier, it needs to fulfill at least two important properties. First of all, it needs to be unique, meaning that no two people should actually have the same identifier. So there is the unicity of this identifier. And then it also needs to be singular. So that means that a person should only be assigned one identifier, because otherwise I could have a plurality of identities, and multiple identifiers could pretend to be different people, whereas it's always referencing to the same identity. And then there is the notion of persona, which is more like the pragmatic or the operational element of an identity, which depends on the context. So it's basically I can be like a researcher at CNRS, but I'm also a friend to someone. I could be a mother of my kid. I could be the wife of husband, etc. So I depending on the context in which an individual is interacting, it could assume different personas, and those personas could be associated with one another, but in some cases they don't need to be, and perhaps sometimes the individual does not want the multiple personas to all be congregated around one single identifier. And so that justifies the creation of multiple identifiers that refer to different personas of the same identity. But then, of course, comes the point in which, in specific situations, for instance, in voting or whenever the singularity is important, there needs to be a way to reassociate or to identify that multiple personas refer to the same identity. And then there's the question of attributes, which is basically the attribute as opposed to the identifier, which is not describing the identity that it refers to. The attributes actually do qualify and describe those identity, the attributes that they have. And again, they can be both endogenous, like inherent to the person, so the gender, the height, etc. Or they could be exogenous, meaning that because that person is recognized as fitting into a particular category, that becomes an attribute. So I could be a student, I could be a French citizen, and so forth, and that depends on the attribute given by something outside of myself. The specificity of attributes as opposed to identifiers is that they are not unique. They don't need to be unique to a particular identity, because many people may actually share the same attributes. But of course, it is the aggregate ensemble of all those attributes that actually might create this unicity. So it is, while it's very common that there are many people that share attributes, the more attributes are congregated together, then the more unique this collection of attributes become, and could potentially become a way of uniquely identify individuals. And so basically there is like these different approaches when we talk about identity management systems. There is the identity management system that are focusing on the generation of identifiers, and therefore unique identifiers. And once again, they need to fulfill those two requirements of unicity and singularity. So when we're talking about unicity, how do we create a unique identifier? Oftentimes, the easy way is to rely on a centralized entity, which will therefore make sure that no individual is given the same identifier. So if all the identifiers are distributed by only one entity, it's quite easy for that authority to verify the unicity and to guarantee the unicity of those identifiers. But of course, that means that there can be only one issuer of identities, or even if there are multiple ones, it means that they all need to communicate with each other about the identifier that they have issued. An alternative one that is emerging is, of course, the question of biometrics, which can be used as a way of uniquely identify individuals. And then there is this third possibility, which is so the centralized entity is an exogenous thing, so you need to rely on a third party to assign this identifier. Biometrics are inherent into the body of the individuals. And then there is the private-public key pair, which is basically just probabilistically virtually impossible that two individuals, even though they generated themselves, will generate the same key pair. And so it becomes possible to generate unique identifiers without having to rely to an external authority that is centralized, and also without having to use our own inherent properties of the body. So the unicity of the identifier is possible to deal with in both in a centralized and in a decentralized manner. When we're moving into singularity, it becomes a little bit more complex. So again, one possible solution is, of course, using a centralized entity which will authenticate every single individual and verify that it doesn't give two different identifiers to the same entity. But of course, this creates problems of privacy, because that means that all the authentication data needs to be controlled by either one centralized authority or by a set of centralized authority, each communicating with each other all this authentication data. And secondly, there is the question then of biometrics. Is it possible to then ensure and guarantee the singularity of this identifier by relying on biometric data? And here, of course, the question is both a question of privacy, because biometric is definitely quite some sensitive information, but also the problem of accuracy, because there is this kind of trade-off that exists with biometric data, that the more accurate it is, the more precise it is, then the more likely it is that it will ensure the singularity. But also, as it gets more and more precise, then it might become inaccurate, because things change, fingerprints may change, or the attribute might change, but also because sometimes if the function that is used to recognize those biometrics is too broad, then it might recognize more people within the same category, or if it's too strict, it might not recognize the same individual. So there is some kind of issue, but mostly it's really the question of like, how do we ensure singularity without entering into a system in which one single authority collects all the authentication data. And then there is an alternative approach, which is actually just not necessarily relying on identity management system as a way of creating and guaranteeing those unique identifiers, but it's more about creating a collection of attributes. So verifiable claims, like a web of trust. So people are providing attestation or credential or claims about other people, and people can collect those attributes, which become this kind of network-proved set of claims and credentials, which could be used as well, at least perhaps not to authenticate oneself as a singular individual, but at least to prove that as an individual, I possess those specific attributes and characteristics which might enable me to access specific services or products. But of course, once again, the difficulty of this approach is that it's very difficult with attributes to ensure the singularity of the identities unless one of those attributes is a discriminating attribute, is an attribute that is unique to that individual. And so that could be biometrics, that could be governmental issued unique identifier, which is used as an attribute to qualify a particular identifier. And so increasingly, biometrics are becoming a popular approach to explore this possibility of relying on a decentralized approach to identity management while ensuring this type of singularity. They, of course, have a lot of benefits because, well, there is no longer the problem of forgetting the password. They are inherently unique to each individual. They are more difficult to forge or to steal than a password. But of course, there is also quite some drawbacks. First of all, is that we do actually leave traces about our biometrics everywhere. So even though it might be more difficult to forge, it is possible to forge it. That's a problem because it's also, while I can change my password if I realize it is compromised, it's more difficult to change my biometrics. And also because our body change and might require updates of the biometrics. And so the recent trend, not so recent, since quite a few years now, of self-sovereign identity is then looking at the way in which we can rely on biometrics combined with blockchain technology in order to try and create this new type of identity management system that will be more privacy enhancing, that will enable selective disclosure of attributes, and that will enable people to maintain control over their own personal data. And so basically in a very small nutshell, self-sovereign identity, the idea is really that today we identify ourselves towards centralized operators, and every time we want to interact with them, we need to provide the authentication data. They are collecting all the information necessary in order to provide the services. And when our identity is controlled by them, meaning that we need to require information if they provide data portability, but like every time I go to a new online operator, I re-identify myself and it creates a new identity and again, a new collection of data. The idea with self-sovereign identity is actually to put the individual at the center, and the individual is in control of its identity attributes and identifiers, and selectively choose how to disclose them to the various services that it needs to interact with, depending on what is the service and what is required for this type of interaction. And so fundamentally, the core characteristic is that the identity needs to be controlled by the individual and therefore automatically are portable. There is not ever a need to require data portability. And therefore, they can also choose in a more informed manner what to share, with whom, and for what purposes. And of course, the notion of self-sovereign identity is kind of it's a strange terminology because identity, by definition, is something that other people also recognize as such. And so there is always an element of the identity cannot be generated from myself. It is also given by me because there is also those exogenous types of identifiers and attributes. And so, but the idea is not about the self-generation, it's really about the control and the management of those identity attributes. And so in the context of those blockchain-based system of self-sovereign identity, basically it goes with like there is some standards that are emerging, which goes with like basic components. And so of course, first and foremost, the public-private keeper, which is the actual unique identifier. So instead of relying on a centralized entity giving me this single identifier, everyone can generate it on their own. But that also means that if anyone can generate their own identifier, I could generate an infinity of identifiers. And then comes the problem of how do we ensure that they are glued to me in a particular manner. And so there is this notion of decentralized identifiers, or DIDs, And the idea with this is to associate a particular URL, which becomes a way of actually identifying a particular data subject with a method and then with a document. And this document then collects the various attributes that can be associated and that are describing that particular subject. And so all this is remain in control of the data subject, and then all the attributes can be either stemming directly from the data subject or collected by the data subject by external authorities, which will provide enhanced credential about those particular attributes. And then comes the notion of verified credential. So basically, if I need to identify myself towards, for instance, a particular operator, which needs to know specific information about me, but doesn't necessarily need to know the rough internet information, doesn't need to know my name, doesn't need to know my age, doesn't need to even know my residence and nationality, but it needs to know that I have a bank account registered in a particular country. And so in this case, I can go to the bank account operator, obtain a verifiable claim that says that this individual that has been verified by the bank and that is associated with this DID does have a bank account at the premises, and then will issue this verified credential that is associated with the DID. And then I can go and present that document to whoever operator I want to interact with. And that person can verify that this is a credential that has been indeed issued by the bank, that is indeed associated with my DID, and hence does not necessarily need to, as long as this operator trusts the issuer of the claim, then doesn't need to ask any extra information, because it knows that those information were already collected by the bank, and therefore doesn't need to replicate this data collection. And then all this information is then recorded on the DID document, which becomes inherently associated with the data subject with me. But I can choose what I want to disclose. I don't always need to disclose all the verified credentials that I have collected, only those that are actually necessary for that particular interaction. And so when it comes to biometrics, it becomes quite important, because there is, of course, a lot of issues with using biometrics as an actual identifier. First of all, because all of a sudden it eliminates the possibility of adopting multiple personas. There is, of course, the privacy issue, the problem of forgery, and so forth. Whereas it becomes interesting if we use biometrics as an actual attribute. So as a particular credential that is associated with this unique identifier that remains this pseudonymous private public key pair. And so we can use biometric during an authentication process, during the enrollment towards a particular system, and then use them both for verification that I am indeed who I claim I am, and for identification in order to actually identify whether I belong to a particular group that might get some privilege or benefits. And so, so I'm gonna give just like a few examples, mostly two examples of like initiatives that have used this model of self-sovereign identities associated with blockchain. So one is Kiva protocol, and the other is the building blocks of the World Food Programme. I'm gonna go very fast, and then maybe we can discuss it further during the second part. But basically, so Kiva is designed as a identity management system for micro-lending, and has been deployed in Sierra Leone. And the model of Kiva is basically relying specifically on this model of verified credential and the IDs and biometrics. And so basically the idea is like how to enable people that do not have, that are unbanked, that do not have proper identification system, that do not have credit history and so forth, to engage into the micro-lending ecosystem. And so they created a system in which people can register themselves, and as they register for an identity, they they get verified by those polling stations. So they get authenticated by authorities that are public authorities, by the Sierra Leone government, and they are assigned both a physical identity card but also a digital DID, which has as attributes specific metadata about this person, including the biometric data. And then basically people can then go to a bank, request a loan, and they will show this DID, and so the bank can see that this person has indeed been identified, and that means that this person has been uniquely identified, because the polling station will verify that if twice there is the same user coming, they will not give a new DID. And so that means that every individual only can have one single DID. And then that person can grant permission and enable the bank to go and retrieve. So the Kiva model is designed so that people can use sub-DIDs. So they create a system in which it is possible to have multiple personas, so that I can have different types of transactions, and people don't necessarily know that it's the same person. But of course, when it comes to lending and to retrieving the credit history, they need to go and they're gonna check to the Kiva server, which is a private server, which actually collects the correspondence between the root DID and all the sub-DIDs. And so when a bank requests the credit history, they're gonna ask Kiva to provide all the claims associated not just with the sub-DID of the persona that is coming to request the loan, but also all the other persona of that same identity. And then they can look and they can see and the hash of those claims, and then the person can show those credentials. They can show that they had already received loans, and they can also show that they have already repaid those loans, because they also get a new credential of repayment whenever the loan is repaid. And so in that sense, they are collecting a series of proof of credit and debt and payment. And over time, they become more and more of a trustworthy identity, and therefore they are more likely to obtain credits in the future. And the important thing is that what is accumulating this credit history is the root DID, which is actually never really used in the general transactions, because it's always the sub-DID that are doing that. And so individuals cannot just look at the blockchain and retrieve the information about who is doing what with regard to all the different personas that the individual are assuming. And yet there is this, if one persona is doing good credit, then it's also benefiting all the other personas of this identity. And then the other one is building blocks. So of course, another thing that I need to say here is that the context here is humanitarian, and it's usually related to people that actually do not have proper identification systems, and oftentimes do not always have reliable connectivity or even phone devices and so forth. And so both Kiva and the World Food Program building block system, while they are designing the system to be a self-sovereign identity system, they also always provide some kind of custodianship of private key, in order to enable that if people don't have a phone, or if they lose their phone, or if it breaks or whatever, they always guarantee this type of backup and accessibility to all this information. So of course it's not fully self-sovereign identity, but they are adopting the model in order to eventually reach a point in which when people will all have a mobile phone, they will be able to actually hold their own private key on their own. And so the World Food Program as well is it was used for a pilot in Jordan with 10,000 Syrian refugees, in order to provide cash aid disbursement via blockchain technology. And so it's the idea was to try and create a system that is as privacy compliant as possible. And so they created this kind of decoupling between the system of biometrics of the UNHCR, which is enrolling people, which is collecting all the biometric data and that is creating within their own system this unique identifier and is associating them with a random string. And then they communicate this random string to the workflow program building block, which then is the one in charge of associating this string with a particular set of public-private keys. And so the idea is that people can go and they get scanned, they get their iris scan, and that the workflow program will identify the associated public-private key with this, and then will disburse or will effectuate the transaction whenever it's possible, or will receive the funds whenever it's necessary. But the important thing is that the building blocks workflow program does not know anything about the identity of those individuals, because that is actually collected by the UNHCR, and vice versa. The UNHCR does not actually know, cannot see what the transactions are being made by those actors, because they don't actually know what is the public key associated with those biometrics. They decouple it in order to enhance the privacy, and so they are not yet fully relying on this. Like the Kiva protocol is a little bit more advanced in terms of self-sovereign identity and verified credential. But the idea of the workflow program is really to create a system that would enable some kind of interoperability amongst all the services of the UN through this decouplement, but also through an integration via the blockchain, meaning that today the different agencies of the UN do not actually share database mostly for privacy reasons, but also for operational and management issues. And the idea here is that if you have like these identities, and then every single authority can qualify them and can provide information about those same identifiers without necessarily associating them with a particular identity, then it becomes possible to create, with a series of verified credentials around this identity, to create a system that is enabling every single authority to know how to deal with that particular actor without having to collect the information to begin with. And so again, this creates a system of data minimization and interoperability, even though it's not specifically focused on yet, at least enabling the individual to be in full control of their own identity system, mostly because it is geared towards refugees. And then, so this is like the self-sovereign identity model for identity management and singularity. And then I just want to talk about this a little bit, because this is quite recent and that's quite an interesting development, at least, which is a different approach to trying to ensure this problem of singularity into the decentralized world. And so Proof of Humanity is has been launched last month, and is basically a protocol which enable people to register and to claim to be unique individuals, and then other people can vouch to declare that they know that person and that they believe this person is a unique individual. And then there is like all a system of claims and challenges. So basically people can submit their profile and they need to make a video, and they have like they write their public key and they have to declare I am a human, and this key is the only key that I'm using for this particular Proof of Humanity protocol. And then people can vouch and approve this particular identity, but then also it is possible to challenge. And both the vouching and the challenge is done in a decentralized manner through the Kleros court, which is decentralized, originally designed as a decentralized arbitration or dispute resolution system, but it's also now evolving towards more this enabling people to do subjective assessment about things that a computer will not be able to do. And so instead of relying on this anti-Sybil resilient system of authentication, it's actually using humans in order to understand whether a human is a human. And so after submitting the profile, there is like a series of random Kleros juror that gets selected and need to approve and say, yes, this looks like this is indeed a human, and they follow the process, etc. But then other people might also realize, maybe if I realize that two people have created two different profiles, or that one is not who they claim they are, they can make a challenge, and again, this challenge will then be analyzed by the Kleros court of proof of humanity in order to see whether that that individual should be removed the identity. And this all come, of course, also with some kind of economic incentive, because so in order to register, you need to put a deposit. So it's like 0.15x, which is currently around $400. And so if my identity is challenged and removed, then of course the individual will lose the deposit, but also the people that have vouched for that person, if the juror of the Kleros court think that they vouch in a malicious way, they may also lose their own identity. So you will only want to vouch for actors that you really think are trustworthy. And so, yeah, there is currently 3,000 unique identities, or allegedly unique identities, that have been registered. And the other interesting aspect of this is that once the user has been approved, then the proof of humanity comes with this UBI system. So unique identities start collecting UBI tokens, which then can be exchanged for either and sold or consumed. But there is increasingly some models that are emerging that people can stake. So the UBI token is almost becoming a mechanism that you use them to stake and to vouch for the identity of other people, right? And so the more UBI tokens are engaged in a particular, whether it's like a particular outer identity, a particular website associated with an identity, etc. So basically, because those tokens are being generated to all those unique identities, people also can commit and stake them in order to prove that they trust this other actor to also be a unique and trustworthy individual. Yeah, so basically, those are like the different ways in which this unique identifier can be done. So we have governmental IDs, we have reverse Turing test, social graph analysis, and now proof of humanity, which is this new mechanism. And just to conclude, I'm just gonna go through just as a trampoline for discussion. So there is of course a lot of benefits in this. So it enables this democratic governance where one person, one vote, as opposed to one token, one vote, or one CPU power, one vote. It is indeed a fully decentralized identity system where the singularity of the identity is based on the trust, and nonetheless maintain the possibility of changing your mind and challenging those identities. But at the same time, it comes with quite some drawbacks, which is, first of all, it requires everyone to publicly disclose at least a video and a name associated with this public key. So in terms of privacy, it might raise some issue, as in, like, I cannot, if I don't want to put my video on the website, which needs to be publicly accessible for the juror to be able to validate it, I cannot get one of those proof of humanity. There is the question also of, like, to which extent, if I were to decide to remove that, to which extent can I really raise it? And so, of course, like, problem with the right to be forgot, the GDPR. And then perhaps more critically is really the fact that if now that my identity is inherently associated with that particular public key that is associated with my proof of humanity, it means that anyone every time, by just looking at the blockchain, can actually see exactly all the transactions that I do, can see what I'm purchasing, what I'm voting on, whatever interaction happened, whatever transaction happened on the blockchain, when using this particular authenticated system. So in some ways, it's kind of like the privacy question becomes quite challenging, because would I rather have no centralized authority that collects data, and rather have this open and decentralized system, but then the cost is that with a centralized entity, only that centralized entity knows what I'm doing. Whereas in this model, everyone that has seen this video knows can track all the interaction that I do. And of course, I could not use my proof of humanity account in order to do many things that I don't want associated with this account. But that means that I can once again only use one persona when it needs to be authenticated as a singular entity, and that actually could also encourage this trend, which is that there is already discussion within these communities about, for instance, creating marketplaces or forum in which only accounts that have a proof of humanity can participate, or maybe not just a proof of humanity, but that have been authenticated as unique individual and certified accounts, meaning that we're kind of moving away from this model of at least the pseudonymity surrounding many of the blockchain services towards a system of whitelisting, in which if my account has not been whitelisted, I cannot use it because I will not have access to many platforms. And therefore, this necessity of students to always KYC and identify, and therefore having to choose between either this public and transparent system that remains decentralized but is highly visible in terms of transaction, or a centralized system if I want to protect my privacy against the publicity of the transactions, but then disclose information, and again, renegating the possibility of having this self-sovereign identity system. Okay, so I will stop here, I think, and we can go to the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Primavera. This was really it was an important session, I think, because you both basically you shown the building blocks, and then you also went to the experimentation. And I think it's the tension that's in the balance between, on the one hand, the accountability and anonymity, sort of the data minimization and the convenience, sort of that you sketched very, very well, sort of throughout the entire session. And I think one of the most important things, well, we all know that basically 20% of Bitcoin is irretrievable. So if we go to self-sovereign identity at this moment in time, and you touched upon this notion of custodians, which is, I think, is one of the most important things that we have to sort of talk about now. And so I think the experimentation that you showed in the last example, but also in the Kiva, especially when it comes to this notion of claims and challenges and vouchers, and sort of, these are the type of things that we need now in order to sort of to design this type of friction in between the kind of stakeholders that there are now between citizens and states and industry. So I think this is, well, tremendously good. So maybe I think moving first, maybe Gail, would you have some comments at first?
I do. I have a question to Primavera and just about everybody else, actually. Interesting is, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
What is interesting is we always work on the assumption of a baseline as a single person having to identify themselves. But it was never the case before this process was digitalized. It was always the case that the only purpose of identifying oneself, whether in a legal way or in a formal way, was reciprocated. That is, you had an exchange between two people, one of which may be representing a public administration, and the other one may be a single person seeking service. Because the most typical exchange, the most typical contact would be if you crossed the border or if you went to the bank, that kind of experience. In which case, both people would identify themselves to each other. That's how the trust is established. It's a two-way relationship. Because even if you didn't know the name of the border officer, you would know that by the fact that they were there and that they had the uniform, usually with even a tag, a number tag, you would know who they were representing and how to seek accountability for them if you were not happy. And there's none of that in the current imaginary of the relationship as digitalized, even in the Kiva project, for example. When you think that you would, there is no clear indication that any of those solutions offer reciprocal trust. If you have to prove yourself to a machine, surely the machine should have to prove yourself to you, prove themselves to you. Isn't that the case?
Yes. I think we've lost Primavera with her connection, because I think she has a bad connection. So I think we'll sort of keep this question sort of with you, Gail, and then maybe we move to Loretta and have Loretta's first comments, and then we'll see when Primavera is back. We try to.
So my comments are that I've read some of the Kleros work, which was, as Primavera said, was launched just last month. I wanted to remind the people who are listening that everything you find on the www.ngi.eu website, that next month we will announce the third call on SSI. It's a business call, so you have to group together. It's not about individuals with ideas, because those calls were already funded. It's essentially the Commission is trying to build a framework of components. So the title of this talk is an ecology, a blockchain ecology, which is now moving to the unexplored area of blockchain, which was the missing layer, the identity layer. And what I found really amazing in this human, whatever it was called, putting back the human, or
Proof of human.
in this Kleros court, proof of human, which Gail said, what about proof of machine? Okay, so what I will start with is that this is not the proof that I am Loretta, okay? The proof that I am Loretta is here, okay? And I have a right to travel without having to have, if I lose a smartphone, or I lose a blockchain, or I lose a key, or I use a public key, the EU gives you treaty rights to citizenship. So I wanted to, again, put the human back in, which is, our unit is called the Internet of Humans. I find this new initiative absolutely inspiring. I have seen that ETH is also behind it, so I think it's a growing group. And one of the speeches which you will find on the NGI network was by somebody called Enrique Piqueras, and who said that in the digital world we lack human identities, and the digital is flat. We need to enrich it, but we don't enrich it by doing, delegitimizing other people, by having bots and AI systems that hack the postal office, the voting, all of the democratic processes. So I'll be very quick, because I think we have such a long discussion here on the chat. Just to mention that I see now civil society and academics and all sorts of actors in this ecology getting a hold of SSI in order to improve society. Now, the thing that I found absolutely amazing when I looked into the Kleros port is that they're actually looking into universal universal basic income. So this is also similar to what Primavera mentioned about the UN work with 10,000 refugees in Jordan who have nothing. Okay, they don't have their country, there's a war, they don't have so to me this is really inspiring, because of course the projects that I funded, and some of the people, I see Federico, I see others in the chat line who were part of these projects, used blockchain to deliver a digital currency for use in a circular economy in the poorest areas of our cities. Now, we're under COVID. We have a lot of unemployed, we need to build resilience. And so the fact that even from the technical part, people would go into the idea of legitimate, ethical uses of technology to control abuses and to redistribute resources, to me is something like tech for good. And finally, I'm very happy about the AI regulation, which, if you've seen it, it's if SSI is 3, all good things come in 3. At least if you're Catholic, you know, there's always 3, the Holy Ghost being the third party. But the triangle of the AI regulation actually eliminates abuses like massive AI surveillance and social credit scoring of individuals. So I hope the realm for human rights is expanding thanks to tech for good. And although the network doesn't always help, I mean, Primavera has published 2 excellent papers. I'm sure some of the slides will also be available. I'm sure people will want them. And you will have a chance to speak to her again on the 17th of May, I mean, through one of these salons. So I would like to thank 2 projects, NGI Forward, Gael and Rob. I would like to thank MAID because your group, Magdalena, is one who records and makes it available immediately. I haven't had that level of success with a lot of other frameworks. So if you've missed some of the talk, if your connection doesn't work, Primavera will be back on the 17th for another SSI Salon. And I think you are welcome to contribute. There will be 1 month for the call, so I announce it now. It's not yet announced, but we're very eager to fund tech for good. I think digital welfare, digital well-being, which is a human to human, and putting trust and humanity and flexibility and moving away from this irrational distrust of tech for bad, which we've seen a lot of tech for bad, and hacking, and machines taking over. So I think the AI regulation puts that back.
Primavera is back. Hi.
I saw my laptop.
Did you manage to catch some of the remarks that were made after that?
No, not at all.
Okay, well, I think what to do, because we're also nearing the end, and you have to go in I think a few minutes, as you stated. So, we'll be back also on May 17. You're also going to be back because you're going to be part of this NGI pre-forum event on May 17, which of course will be very short. But we've had a lot of good comments in the chat, and Gail and me were going to sort of take all these comments, make some notes about it, and then distribute that and try to get this conversation going. Because I think what you've sketched and what Loretta has just mentioned is that you've really sketched a few trajectories that are now happening, that are focusing on the key issues, which I think is especially is this custodianship, because as I think as you also sort of said that we will probably not be in a position soon to go to fully SSI and envisage that all individuals will be able to handle private keys and all of these things. So it's this custodianship on which the brunt of the work and energy now is focused. And you've shown some of the routes that this custodianship could go, and this is very much into negotiation. And so we need to work on these negotiation procedures, and I think that's basically what you showed. So maybe Loretta, you want to say something to Primavera before we all go? And thanks again for all the participation, all the great things happening in the chat, which we cannot take in now, but we will do this in a report. And again, on May 17, we'll convene again. And I think what we've seen now today is that we need to put up some kind of another discussion on a platform where we all can participate soon. But for now, I want to thank Magdalena for hosting. and for being such a good partner with us. And then maybe Loretta, you want to sort of end and this?
Yes, I will end saying arrivederci because we mentioned the next meeting with Primavera, but I also mentioned the SSI ESIF Lab call. You can find it on NGI.eu. It will open 1st of May, I believe, so there will be a month. So please encourage all the civil society organizations that want to test this interoperability, this ecology of blockchain with an identity, with an ethical AI. If you want to join this framework, please submit your ideas to that call or encourage those people who you know can benefit from our call to apply. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Primavera. That was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
And yeah, we'll see you on May 17, and wish everybody a very good day. And thanks again for everybody in the chat for the participation. Thanks a lot. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Merci.